Amur falcons.
All right, that was a lovely video. Uh, I stay not too far away from the Amur falcon roosting site, so this is next on my bucket list definitely to go and have a look there. Uh, Welcome, Pia. It's good to
Thank
have you. But
you,
let me
Kuntal.
kind of introduce Pia first. Just give a moment. All right. Uh, Today's webinar, as I told you, is a special one. It's the second one from our sustainability series, uh, where we continue our focus on the Eastern Himalayas with Dr. Pia Sethi taking us on a wonderful journey of Nagaland in Northeast India. Have you wondered how the crimson sunbird got its red neck, or heard about the father who spoke to his son as a cuckoo bird, or of how the revival of ancient myths and traditions can help rescue a rainforest and hornbills? So that's what today's webinar is all about. Um, Dr. Pia Sethi in this webinar will wander through Nagaland talking myths, birds, butterfly, conservation. From the hills of Konoma Isha's first green village to Doyang Dam in Wokha, where the Amur falcons roost en route to South Africa, which you just saw. From legends and folklore to the community conservation and ecotourism today in Nagaland, and ultimately through a saga of hope as communities band together to create community conserved areas and reduce hunting. To introduce Dr. Pia Sethi, Dr. Pia Sethi is a conservation biologist whose research centers around the impacts of anthropogenic meaning environmental pollution and pollutants originating in human activity on the ecology, conservation, and management of forest ecosystems. It also includes larger issues that encompass community-based conservation, sustainable tourism, protected area management, indigenous knowledge and folklore, and the impacts of hunting. She has been a team leader for several assignments with the World Bank, the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency, the Japan International Cooperation Agency, the Global Environment Facility, and many others. Dr. Sethi has also published extensively in several international high-impact journals and co-authored a book on community forest management. She likes traveling and working in the Eastern Himalayas as much as possible. Welcome, Dr. Sethi, to today's webinar. I hand over the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Kuntal, for that very, very kind introduction. It's an honor and privilege for me to be here today, and I know you've had several illustrious speakers, so thank you very much for inviting me today. I'll be sharing my screen now, I think, and for the presentation.
Yeah.
So today I'm going to be taking you on a saga through Nagaland. Now my work in Nagaland and the northeast of India actually started while I was doing my PhD. I was studying the hunting of hornbills by local tribals and how that actually impacted the forest and forest ecosystems. And during that process, I became very interested in traditional folklore and practices which the tribal communities had evolved over centuries, and also in terms of community conservation. So when I heard that Nagaland in particular has several community conserved areas which the local communities have set up on their own, they're completely self-initiated. When I actually got the opportunity to go and document some of these community conserved areas, as well as document some of the traditional practices, I absolutely jumped at the opportunity. So today I will take you through a saga of part of Nagaland, not the whole of Nagaland, but the areas which I have worked. And on my screen, on the left-hand side of my screen, is a picture of the Sumi community or the Sema community, where I have actually worked on community conservation with the local communities and in terms of ecotourism development. But before I actually get into my journey, I don't know how many people in the audience here are actually familiar with Nagaland or have visited. So it's important to understand how the entire governance system is structured, because everything actually depends on this. Now, Nagaland is an incredible area in the sense that it's a complete village republic. So each village is very autonomous, and all these customary rights are recognized today under the Indian Constitution as well. Now, traditionally, each village, they had a village council, and they had the Gaon Buras, the village elders or chiefs, who played a very, very important role in management and overseeing all the activities in the village. And even today, under a particular act, the Nagaland Village and Area Council Act 1978, these traditional village councils are maintained. Although the village council consists of elected members, it also has representatives of the village elders. So the village elders are a part of the village council, and they have full voting rights. Now, what is interesting about these villages in Nagaland is that they own their entire lands, they manage them, they dispense justice, and they're completely independent. And this actually reflects their status before. They were warrior tribes where each village played an important role in defending its territory. So there's been a continuity over the ages in terms of management practices even today. And I'll be talking about sustainability issues with regard to conservation and forests. So in terms of forest ownership practices, it's quite fascinating, because 93% of Nagaland's forests today, and that includes rivers and other habitats, are owned by the local communities itself. That is, they're privately owned. They can be by individuals, they can be by clans or by the community, but only a small part of the area is actually under the control of the forest department. So the local communities are given full autonomy, again under the same act, to supervise the proper maintenance of their forest. They don't receive any money actually to do it, but it is part of their traditional roles which they have played. And I personally believe that the reason Nagaland is so heavily forested today, almost 80% of the state is still under forest, of which half of that is densely forested, very, very thickly forested areas. So that's also because of this private ownership pattern. And I'll be going into the culture and the traditions. Now, the local Nagaland communities, their agriculture is also strongly tied in with the forests, which is one of the reasons the state is as green as it is today. But again, it's very progressive in terms of the laws which allow the local communities to manage all their resources. And a recent law, which was passed in 2002, allows the communities full management over a range of different sectors, including ecotourism, as well as biodiversity, water. And the state government actually just funds some of these activities, provides technical advice, but all autonomy lies with each village, with the local community. So it's a very, very interesting system of what actually works on the ground when communities are given full control over their resources. I'll go into farming in the forest a little bit. In Nagaland and in much of the Northeast as well, communities practice what's known as shifting agriculture, shifting cultivation, or it's also called jhoom. Now, in shifting cultivation, as the name suggests, little pieces of land, forest land, are cleared, and then they are planted with crops. The crops are cultivated for 1 or 2 years, and then the actual lands which are cultivated are just abandoned back to forest. They're left as fallows. So it's a very, very sustainable practice, because in these areas and in areas wherever you have rainforest, for example, much of the actual fertility is tied up in the biomass. The soils are very thin, they're not very fertile. So this system is completely in tune with the local ecosystem, with the local ecology. But what has happened over time is that as population has increased, as pressures have increased, so these fallow cycles have decreased. So for example, they were earlier 30 years, they went down to 15 years, then to 7 or 9 years. And in fact, I was reading some of the writings of the British colonialists who actually say that with the Sumi community, which is where I work, it actually went down to 3 to 5 years, which is a very, very short cycle. But we must understand that every part of the life of local communities is actually tied up with their shifting cultivation practices. So for example, the Sumi community, they have two festivals, two main festivals, Ahuna and Tulini, and these also revolve around their shifting cultivation. So forests still exist in Nagaland because their traditional practices, their culture, their agriculture, everything is tied into the forests. The forests are really very, very important to them. The other thing is that it leads to a lot of equality. There's no, if you travel through Nagaland, and I really invite you to do so, especially after listening to this talk, nobody is poor there. So everybody gets a piece of the shifting cultivation land to actually cultivate, to grow their crops, even if they don't actually own it. And in terms of ownership patterns, it's very variable across all the different tribes. So with the Sumi tribes where I work, it's a very feudal system in a sense, because the chief has a lot of power. He is very patriarchal, and all the local communities, the Naga tribes, they actually, for example, they volunteer their labor 12 times a year in some villages. But at the same time, the chief makes sure they have a piece of land to cultivate. In other communities and other tribal communities like the Ao, for example, it's far more egalitarian. What's interesting there is that they don't even have hereditary chiefs. The chiefs are elected, and the local village communities play an important role in the management and governance of resources. So when you travel through Nagaland, on the surface, it may look similar. You'll have the same hills, but if you go from village to village, from district to district, and tribe to tribe, it's very, very different in terms of everything: their dances, their culture, their practices, their folklore, their stories, and their governance and ownership patterns. So if you ever go there, make sure that you spend some time. They also have a practice of pani kheti, that's water agriculture, which basically means that in all the river valleys, rice paddy is grown. And even in the valleys where there's no water meandering through, it's a runoff through the hills which actually flows down and helps to fertilize the paddy fields. Now, if you travel through Nagaland, it may be a bit disturbing because in all the roadside stalls, along with a variety of fruits and vegetables, you also see a lot of animals being sold. And this is a picture of something I'd never seen before in my life. It was a ferret badger, and it was just being sold by the side of the road as I was traveling through on the way to my own villages where I work. And at that point of time, we were so shocked to see it, we didn't even know how to identify it. We couldn't figure out if it was a large or a small Chinese ferret badger, because you had to look at the dentition, the teeth structure, and we didn't even realize it at that point. So you will see a lot of these sites as you travel through Nagaland. So hunting is very much a part of the tradition, of the life of the local communities. It's actually a sacred practice. So whenever big feasts are given to honor people, to honor guests, wild meat is slaughtered. And even today, because although the Wildlife Protection Act, which is the Indian Act, which actually prohibits hunting across the country, even though it's still it's operative in Nagaland, the local communities are not aware of it because they own the land, they own the forest, so they assume that they own the animals and the wildlife in those forests as well. And a number of the species which are actually hunted, and there have been lots of studies which have documented these, have also found that some of them are endangered and vulnerable. But what I would like to say is that traditionally, Guns were not used. All kinds of local snares and traps were basically the practice to catch animals. And there was a lot of knowledge of the behavior of each species of animal. And basically, they had lots of different kinds of traps and snares which would be used to catch a variety of animals. And because the populations were much, much lower at that point of time, they say from 1961 onwards, the population of humans is actually increased by 64%. But initially, offtakes of animals were pretty sustainable. And they, apart from being a cultural practice, they were an important protein source for the local communities. Remember, these are really very remote areas. Where would they get their protein from? Yes, they have livestock, but wildlife was also important. And because pressures were so low, it really didn't impact populations, I believe, at one point of time. Now, this is a picture of these baskets which are actually used to catch fish. I actually have one here in my room at the moment. And this is the Osa Wildlife Sanctuary. Now, what's fascinating about Nagaland is you have only a few government nominated or identified sanctuaries and national parks. Most of the local communities, if they want to protect a piece of area, they call it a sanctuary. So here, during the monsoon, you have a lot of green pigeons. In fact, they come in their thousands to the salt lake. So the local community just declared that area a sanctuary for those particular birds. So you can just travel around and come across sanctuaries which may not be government sanctioned at all. But they also, apart from the fact that they used very simple traps and snares, human populations were low, they also made sure that whatever they took was sustainable. So they had a lot of conservation practices which were tied up with their traditional folklore, with their beliefs, with their myths. And even today, a lot of these are practiced. So for example, in this picture, the people, the local communities, the Sema community are lighting a fire without matches at all. So they continue to, for example, for every festival, they will have their local dances, they will have yodeling, they will have all kinds of competitions. But a number of the actual stories, the stories relating to wildlife, to conservation, they are actually dying out. And in fact, in 1926, J.P. Mills, he actually laments that the past is being allowed to die. And I was just discussing this with Kuntil right now, but as I've been working in Nagaland in the last 4 or 5 years, in the last 2 years, I have seen two of the village elders who had a wealth of knowledge. They had been there from British times. They passed away. And youngsters are not so interested in these stories and traditions. And because in Nagaland, it's only recently that they've been using English as a script, they had no actual script, any written word. So everything was an oral tradition which was passed down, and that was the way knowledge was actually transferred. So all the knowledge was basically in the heads of the village elders. So it's important, I think, for us to encourage local people, for ourselves to record all these wonderful stories. And I'll tell you some of them as I go along. So I worked with the Sumi tribe. I was at this organization called TERI, the Energy and Resources Institute. And with the support of the Nagaland Forest Department and later through various funding agencies, including Jeff Satoyama project through Conservation International Japan, we were able to actually move into the interior of Nagaland, to Zuniboto, to actually document the traditional practices and folklore of the Sumi community. Now, what's interesting is that the Sumi tribe, it's one of the largest tribes. They were the most fierce tribe. Now, everybody has heard about the Konyak tribe because they're quite famous with all their tattoos. But it seems that the Sumi tribe were very, very fierce. Although with us, they have always been really, really welcoming. And we just landed up in their villages and they gave us a wonderful warm meal. And since then, for the last 5 years, I've been there almost every 2 months working with the Sumi community. Now, if any of you have ever been to Kohima or who plan to do any time in the future, do try and stay at the Heritage Hotel. it has seen history happening within its own grounds. So this used to be the residence of all the deputy commissioners during British times. And actually the Battle of Kohima was fought in the tennis courts of the Heritage Hotel. Now, when I first went there, I saw this board which actually lists all the deputy commissioners, the British deputy commissioners who who posted to the Naga Hills. And at the end, there are two names. One is J.P. Mills, who I just mentioned, and another was Hutton. At that point, little did I realize that I'd be working with the Sumi community, or they also call the Sema Nagas, and I would refer extensively to Hutton's book. Now, it's a treatise in the old British style where they have documented just about everything. In fact, when we started documenting the practices, I found there was very little new which I could tell, and new stories apart from what was happening today. Because everything, whether it's the architecture, it's the language, it's a dialect, it's the origin, it's the myths and traditions, everything have been documented in great detail. Now, the origin of the Naga tribes is very, very obscure, and because they didn't have any written traditions. So it's basically the oral stories which have helped to provide some kind of evidence of where they actually came from. Now, the local people told me that they were from the Sumi community, from the Chin region of Myanmar. And as I was reading various documents, there seems to be some kind of a general consensus that the people of Nagaland and the larger Naga tribes, they come from Mongolia or Tibet or China, and they actually migrated downwards through Myanmar to the Mulmen Sea of Myanmar. And then they actually went back up to the Naga Hills where they're finally found today. And I'll be telling you one of the stories where they actually refer to a sea in their stories. And when I first heard this story, I really didn't know much about these communities. And I was quite taken aback because where would a sea come? How would the Naga tribes know about a sea? But that obviously shows that at some point of time in their migration, they actually were settled by a sea, or they passed a sea on their migrations. So it's very interesting when you actually read their stories, because they all have a sort of conservation angle. They're all about using resources sustainably. And I'll be taking you on a tour of 3 communities where they're conserving their forests, their wildlife, and where ecotourism is also happening. They're at various stages of evolution. So where I work, it's all a new process. Honama, many of you must have heard about it, as well as Boka, where conservation has been going on for a fair amount of time now. So they're all dominated by the Angami tribe, the Sumi tribe, and the Lotha tribe. And what's interesting is that they are all related. In fact, the origin of the Sumi tribe basically goes that the ancestors of these 3 tribes were brothers. And they used to take some paddy and lay it out on a stone every day. Now, there was a kind spirit who would always double the paddy for them, so that by nightfall, they could have a lot of paddy, enough to feed themselves. But they were warring tribes, remember? So the brothers would fight amongst themselves as to, whose turn it was to lay out the paddy. The parents were getting increasingly worried, saying that, they're going to kill each other, saying that it's not my turn. I don't want to have to do this menial task. So the parents actually went, they broke up the stone, they put eggs on it, they lit it on fire, and the spirit, the kind spirit, departed. So once the spirit had departed, the paddy was not increasing any longer, they didn't have enough to feed themselves, and so they actually had to depart and move in 3 different directions, 3 brothers, and they gave rise to the different tribes, the 3 tribes. Now, all the tribes are warrior tribes, as you're probably well aware. So if you travel through Nagaland, do notice that each of the villages are on the summit of a hill so that they can see their enemies coming from afar. But the Sumi community, remember, they were the fiercest of all. And so every part of their life and land management seems to be associated with war, even today. So villages were very, very small, And all their cultivated lands, their jhum lands, are actually very close to the village, so that if they ever get word of an enemy coming, all the local people who are working the fields can be quickly called to come and defend the village. Also, interestingly, the elder son, the eldest son, rather than inheriting the land and all the rights which normally happens to the village, he is actually asked by his father, the chief, to move out. He is asked to move out and create his own village. And why? It's because the ancestral village is really important. So when all the villages are surrounding the ancestral village, they are all protected by ties of kinship. And I have always thought is also a way of managing resources, because rather than fragmenting the lands, these are fragile forests, they get to move into new areas to ensure that their footprint, their ecological footprint on the land is relatively mild and benign. So what's interesting is that there's a strong belief of the interconnectedness of nature, of human beings, of nature, and of God. And all the stories actually say this. And what one finds is that the tiger in particular is really revered in Naga society, because the tiger is considered to be a brother of a human. So the story goes that once upon a time, a spirit, a tiger, and a human, they actually lived as one family with their mother. And their mother, in a sense, represents the earth. So now what happens is that the tiger was a little wild. He was a tiger after all. And he would often disturb the mother, and he would sometimes nip her. And she was getting a little tired of him. So she very cleverly organized, and there are lots of versions of the story, but basically what happens is she organized a tournament, and whoever lost the tournament would have to go and live in the village, in the jungle, and look after all the animals. But basically the spirit and the human being, they actually conspired, they worked together to defeat the tiger. Rather, they actually cheated. And so what happened was the poor tiger was banished. He had to live in the jungle. But the story doesn't end there. Human beings are really crafty. So once the brother, the human brother, he sent an emissary to the tiger, and he was supposed to tell the tiger that share a part of your prey with us, leave it on the village wall, because after all, we are brothers. But the emissary actually got it wrong, and he went and told the tiger, the human beings want all of your prey. They want to eat all your food, so make sure that you leave it, otherwise you'll be in trouble. And so the tiger was really upset with this, and that's why there's a lot of tension between the wild animals of the forest, the tiger, and the human being today. And the other part of the story is that when the mother, she dies, she becomes one with the earth. So the Naga communities, they strongly believe that the earth is sacred. The earth is, after all, their mother. And so they traditionally have a lot of practices which, to make sure that all their use of wild animals is sustainable as far as possible. The other remember, they consider the tiger to be their brother. So they have a lot of very interesting beliefs. One of them is it's called lycanthropy, where they actually believe that there are some Naga people whose souls enter the body of a tiger or a leopard. Now what happens is they don't actually transform into tigers or leopards, but when they inhabit, their souls inhabit the bodies of these animals, then if the tiger or leopard is killed or is wounded in some way, it impacts the human being as well. And for me, it was really interesting, because even today, as I travel around Nagaland, a lot of people actually believe this story, and they tell me that there are certain things which are beyond our understanding, and this is one of them. And I was not able to meet. I believe there used to be a Sumi, a man who could his soul transmuted into that of a tiger, but I was not really able to meet him. And when you read some of the work by Hutton, he's got a paper on the leopard men of the Naga Hills, and he has actually met with a number of these people. And he tells this one story about this famous leopard man who would tell all the non-believers that you don't believe in this, but it's true. And I promise you, you are going to see a leopard at so-and-so time, at that so-and-so place. And as Hutton puts it, they invariably do. So because everything is passed down orally, the oral traditions, they have lots of stories so that hunters can identify the different birds. And they're made interesting. It's not just about seeing something and remembering its name. So a fascinating story which was told to me by the local communities in the villages where I work is the story of the crimson sunbird, the idger as it's called, and how it actually acquires its red neck. Now remember, it's not completely red, but just a bit of it, the head and the neck is red. So story has it that at one point in time, there was a huge war which was fought between the python and the eagle for supremacy over the land and supremacy over the air. And after this long and difficult battle, it was the eagle who won. So to celebrate, he called all the birds of the air to have a party in the evening and to eat a bit of the meat of the python. So for whatever reason, this crimson sunbird arrived late. And idger, as I said, means late. He arrived late to the party and he just got a few pieces of meat. So he buried his head into the meat and a few drops of blood trickled down his neck, which is why the whole of him is not completely red. It's just this tiny part of him. Another really interesting story, and Kuntal had mentioned it, and if you're a bird watcher, and a lot of our tourism is caught up with birding and developing bird and butterfly tourism. Well, this was a really fascinating story. So whenever, whatever practices are followed in terms of farming, actually are in tune with nature. So the time they actually plant their paddy is when this bird, the Indian cuckoo, calls. And Indian cuckoo actually only calls during the breeding period, which is somewhere between April and June. It's not known that well exactly how it breeds or when it breeds exactly. So the story goes that there was this man called Kaso. And Kaso was visited in his dream by his father. His father had died a little while ago. And the father tells him, he says, Kaso, please don't sow any paddy till I give you a sign. So Kaso says, fine, of course, you're my father. I'll obey whatever you say. And what happens is that all the other villagers, they start planting the paddy and their paddy starts doing well. It grows tall and green and strong. And Kaso gets increasingly worried. He thinks, oh my God, I'm not going to get any paddy this year. I'm going to starve. And so he picks up the paddy seed and he starts walking towards his fields. And then suddenly on the way, he hears this voice saying, Kasu Papo, Kasu Papo, Kaso your father. And then he knows it's time to actually plant the seed and he does it gladly. And in fact, only his paddy survives because it was the right time to plant it. The others had planted it a little too early. And so this is the call of the Indian cuckoo, and it says Kasu Papo. So there's another very interesting story. Whenever we think of rats, they come into our house, they eat our grain, they're nuisances, they're pest species. But for the Naga communities, they realize they have their role too. So the story says that human beings didn't have very many plants in terms of crop plants to cultivate initially. And they had very poor yields. And so they went looking around for what they could actually grow and eat. And they came across this paddy plant, which was in the middle of a big sea. And that's where I had talked about earlier, where does the sea come into the Naga Hills? Well, anyway, so the rat, he comes to the human being and he says, look, I will actually retrieve this paddy plant for you. But you must make sure that once you get lots of yield and lots of grain, I'm always for eternity going to share your grain. So I'm going to eat the grain from your barn. I'm going to eat the grain from your fields. And so the man says, okay, what can he do? He needs food. And since then, they have gladly shared a part of their harvest with the rat. And similarly, they have this interesting tale about the earthworm. Now, we all know that the earthworms enhance fertility, and the Naga tribes traditionally knew that as well. So the story goes that the yields were again very poor, and this Naga man, this father, was very sad. He thought he wouldn't be able to feed his children, they would starve to death. And so the earthworm comes to him and he says, "You look really sad. What is the matter?" So he tells the earthworm the whole story. And the earthworm says, "Fine, I will make sure that your soil is fertile. But remember, you must not despise me. You must not crush me. You must remember that lowly as I am so important to you. And you must keep the story alive." And that's why the earthworm still today, and we all know this, makes the soil fertile. So I'll just tell you one more story. It's very close to my heart because, as I said, I worked on the hunting of hornbills in Nagaland, and hornbills are very important dispersers of seeds. They are critical actually to the survival of some of the important tree species in a forest. And they also have a very interesting breeding pattern. So some of you must be aware of this. What happens is that the female nests in a cavity on a very, very tall buttress tree, and she actually holds herself in, and she walls herself in, and she barricades that cavity, and there's only a thin slit through which the male hornbill passes her fruit and insects and various reptiles, but mostly fruit. And so I had noticed that tribal communities across the Northeast, they actually traditionally, it's different today, they don't believe in hunting hornbills during the breeding season. And in fact, they're very particular that pregnant animals are not killed because they know that will impact the populations in the long run. So the Naga story as to why they actually do this goes a little bit like this. There were two boys who were in love with the same girl. On the surface of it, they were friends though, and they would go hunting together. So they went looking for hornbill nests, and they saw this hornbill nest atop a really tall tree. So they used one of them used a bamboo ladder, and he climbed right on top. Now the other brother was very crafty. He wanted to get the girl. So he got rid of the bamboo ladder, he took it down, and that poor man, the other boy, he was left right on top of this buttress tree. There was, and if you see these trees, they're called Tetramelis nudiflora trees, where hornbills commonly nest. They're really, really very tall. There's no way you can get down there. So he was hungry. He started eating the fruit which the male hornbill brought for the chicks. But that was not going to last very long. So he decided that he would cut off the feathers and the tail of the chicks and make himself wings so he could fly down to earth. Now the female hornbill heard what he was planning. So she begged him. She said, "Please don't harm my chicks. I promise I'll get you down to earth safely." And then suddenly a huge flock of hornbills appeared, and they carried this man safely to the ground. And he was so thankful that from that day onward, they have never hunted the hornbill during the breeding season. And now my work in Arunachal, my PhD, on ecology, actually showed me that there's some trees, the large seeded trees in the forest, which depend entirely, they fruit only during the breeding season of hornbills, and they depend on the hornbills to actually get them moved across the forest, dispersed across the forest, where they move away from the enemies and they can regenerate and grow. A very, very critical ecosystem service which hornbills provide. And if hornbills were hunted during this period, it would make it really hard for these seeds to be dispersed across the forest. So the local communities are not only protecting hornbills, they're protecting all the other interlinkages which happen in a forest. And there's so much more to understand in terms of the ecological linkages in these rainforests. But everything is not hunky-dory, really. There are a lot of challenges which are faced today. The small populations of earlier years have now changed. People hunt with guns. They actually use very destructive practices to fish. They use batteries and electric currents, which actually electrocute everything in the river apart from the fish. So sustainability has now become an issue, and a lot of their traditional beliefs and systems are being eroded for a lot of reasons. A lot of the youngsters today are not interested in those traditions. There have been changes in religious practices, and all of that has changed what is happening, and this has impacted wildlife populations. In fact, a lot of my friends who are birders, they really complain. They say that they're silent forests. It's really very eerie, the silence, when you go to Nagaland. You don't see birds the way you would in the Western Himalaya, for example. And something should be done to actually stop this. Well, there's a lot of hope, really, today. One, we must realize that the forests have been maintained by the local communities. They wouldn't be there if it wasn't for them. Also, when we started documenting conservation practices in Nagaland, we found that almost a third of the villages there actually have set up what are called community conserved areas. So they set aside a small patch of forest and protect it in various ways. They may not hunt there, or they may also not log there or collect fruits and vegetables there, and they basically protect these areas. And many of these patches of forests are secondary forests or primary forests, or even regenerating jhumes, which have just been abandoned back to the forest. So it's a very, very well-known practice, and you'll see these signboards all over telling you that, you know, this is a community conserved area, and these are restrictions in terms of what you can actually do there. This is actually a picture of Boca, and some of you were watching this film which they just showed on the Amur falcons. And we actually looked at these community conserved areas, and what was really heartening was that the communities had created these areas completely on their own sanctuaries, their own community conserved areas, and very few of them actually had the support of any NGO to do it, or the forest department. They themselves had realized that they were at a critical juncture today. Their forests were decreasing in quality, their agricultural yields, which are linked to the forests, were going down. There was increasing water scarcity, there were wildlife shortages. All the elders will tell you about how much wildlife they actually saw in an area. And many of you must have heard of the Hornbill Festival. Some of you must have visited. But as important as a Hornbill Festival is today, it's hard to see a hornbill in the wild. I have not yet seen one in the wild. There are just a few pockets where, and it's very, very exciting whenever you hear new sightings of hornbills. So the local communities are realizing that they are at the crossroads. They need to do something for future generations. And they're very proud of their people, of their traditions and customs. And so when they talk amongst themselves, or you talk to them about maintaining these traditions, about protecting their wildlife as well, they absolutely understand how important it is, even though it means a lot of sacrifices for them. So I won't go much into these community conserved areas. Although they are set aside, they have a lot of problems associated, in the sense they're still very small areas. They are not connected in most cases across the landscape, which makes it difficult for them to maintain viable populations of wildlife. They also have no money for these activities, and they often have to patrol them against poachers and hunters from other areas. And it becomes very difficult for them without any kind of financial support. And that is where community conservation always needs to be accompanied by, as far as possible, with other livelihood options. Because although agriculture is very sustainable in Nagaland, and even during this COVID period when there was no ecotourism happening, it didn't really impact the communities, because they have a wealth of plants which they grow in their jhum cultivation, and enough food to go around. But they do need they're part of a cash economy today. So they need to send their kids to school, especially. The kids always study outside the village. They live in remote areas. They need to buy groceries, certain basic essentials. And for that, they need cash income. And if they're setting aside these areas, if they're stopping hunting, it becomes very difficult for them. Now, I think most of you have seen this Moor Falcon documentary just now. But this is an amazing story of conservation, because what happened was, from what I can gather, Nagaland was always on the migratory pathway of the Amur falcon, but they came in smaller numbers to this particular area in Wokha. But it was only after a reservoir, the Doyang Reservoir, was created in 2000, that actually suddenly there was this massive influx. They say much of the global population, tens of thousands, some people have said a million, we don't know the exact numbers. They actually descend on this reservoir in, they've actually come into the area right now in October, where they stay for quite a long time. And so it's the largest influx of raptors on their migratory pathway anywhere in the world where they stay for such a long period of time. And it was only in 2005 and 2006 that the local people there actually started hunting them. They are hunting tribes, they eat wildlife. And they suddenly found that there were these birds in their millions just waiting to be caught and trapped. And so this practice happened for a long time till Bano Haralo and various other people with the forest department, they started working with the local communities because they realized that this offtake was probably not sustainable. So for example, 140,000, some of the figures show, of these falcons were caught in a 10-day period. And if much of the global population is actually stopping here, within a few years, the entire population could be wiped out. So they worked with the local communities to encourage them to stop this hunting practice. So all this process, this whole process was discovered by Bano and others of her team in 2012. And by 2013, there was a complete stop on hunting which had actually occurred. But how did this actually happen? Well, some of it was policing and enforcing, but it was basically telling the Naga farmers that if you hunt these birds, and they eat insects, they're insectivorous, they don't eat anything else but insects, then the farmers who are in South Africa, now remember these birds are migrating from Russia, from China, from Mongolia, right down via Nagaland to South Africa. And the farmers in South Africa await their arrival because they're wonderful agricultural pests, and they protect their farms and their lands. So this was one of the way they actually spoke and influenced the communities to stop this hunting. All these are examples of, connections across time and space. So for example, they talked about the Bible, where in some place, I think it was Leviticus, it says that eating a falcon, for example, is unclean. And so the Baptist church, and now Nagaland is predominantly Baptist, they talked to the communities and told them, look, for all these various reasons, one should actually stop hunting the Amur falcon. And in fact, a very interesting story of the Sema community is that when they die, their body is carried by a falcon to the Hill of the Dead, which is at Wokha. So that also seems to suggest that although in smaller numbers, Amur falcons were very much migrating across Nagaland for a long period of time, so much that it's become a part of their folklore and their stories. And this has been an amazing success story because within 1 year, between 2012 to 2013, this was completely stopped. But what I would like to say is that we need to look beyond these grim pictures of, this massive hunting, and it seems very cruel. Because the local people are making a lot of sacrifices when they actually stop this. So they, as I said, they needed that cash income, and some studies have shown that the village of Pangti, which is the closest to where the roosting sites of the Amur falcon, they would make almost 3.5 million rupees in one season when the Amurs came by, and then they would use that for their children's education. And also when this reservoir was created, large areas of their farmlands were actually dunked under the water. So it is difficult for them. And ecotourism is one solution, which is why I say, please come and visit. And in this photograph, we were basically taking ecotourists to our village sites in Zuniboto via Wokha, so that they could see the Amur falcon. So this was in October. And as far as possible, one should try and link up. So for example, go from Kaziranga, go to Konama, go to Wokha in October, if it's during the Amur's falcon season, and then go on to Zuniboto and some of the areas where community conservation practices are happening. At the same time, as Banu had said, ecotourism is no panacea. Currently, there are very few people who actually come there. and the benefits are only flowing to a few of the people. So it has to be made more equitable. There's a lot of training which is required for the local people in Wokha district. And the other thing, and I'll be talking about it later, is that we need to make sure that we are happy with small scale, simple homestays, nothing fancy, because that way you preserve the environment and the important forests around for the birds. If you start building these big hotels and lodges, the birds are going to move somewhere else. And already that's happening. The more falcons are now fanning out across Nagaland. Whether they're finding termites, they eat a lot of termites, so they come for the termite eruptions, or whether there's more disturbance at Wokha, or there's protection across Nagaland for more falcons. We don't really know, but you're seeing them in far more locations today than one did a few years ago. And I've been going almost every year since 2013, except for, unfortunately, this year and the year before. Now, I should have actually started with Honama, because one goes from Dimapur to Kohima, to Honama, which is very close to Kohima, and then onwards to Zunibotha, to my own sites. That's the kind of journey I wanted to take. But anyway, I just want to tell you briefly about Honama. A lot of visitors actually come here because it's so close to Kohima. So they come to the Hornbill Festival, they visit this area, and this is actually an example, one of the oldest examples of community conservation, bioconservation in Nagaland. This village in Honama is almost 700 years old, and I believe they fought against the British and resisted them from between, I think it was the 1830s to the 1880s. And they also started conservation in Nagaland in the 1990s. Now, what I'll be telling you about is that for community conservation to work, you always need champions. You need local champions. And so there was this amazing man called Saili Sakhri, who actually started this whole process. And in 1998, 20 square kilometers were actually set aside, and they called it a sanctuary. Again, it's a local community sanctuary. And what's fascinating, if you're into bird watching, is this area has a Blight's trigopan, the state bird of Nagaland, which is very secretive. It's found in the dense jungle. It's not easy to see, and it's only in the higher reaches of this area. But with support of a lot of people, with some funding, and then it was later declared a green village by the government, you have a lot of tourism which has developed here as well. I believe there's 12 homestays. I saw a very, very beautiful homestay when I stayed there briefly. Most of my time, it took me a lot of time to reach my own village areas that I couldn't spend as much time as I would have liked in Konuma. But very, very active there. And in fact, one of the premier, in fact, the only and the best bird guide of Nagaland is Angoli Mease, who also helped us in our project. And he takes visitors, he's from Honama, and he takes visitors to all the important birding areas of Nagaland. They also have a very interesting sustainable agricultural process, which I'll go into briefly. Now, Jhum cultivation, because fallows have been decreasing in length, there are lots of issues of soil erosion and fertility of the soil. Now, what these people here in Konama realize that the alder tree, which grows wild there, it's Alder nipolensis, it's what's called a nitrogen fixing tree. So it replenishes the soil of nitrogen. And so the local communities don't need such a long cycle. They can actually come back to the same area within 2 to 4 years. And the local people have evolved this interesting way of managing this particular tree. So they don't completely clear it when they plant their crops. This is not a very good photograph, but they cut the tree, what's called pollarding, at a height of about 6 feet. They use whatever they cut for timber, and the tree continues to live, and it continues to grow and provide nitrogen to the soils there. And this is a set of ecotourists who we actually took via Wokha. This was in December 2018. I'll briefly now tell you about the story of Pizza Valley, because this is where I got first-hand knowledge of how to actually set up an ecotourism venture, to work with the communities, to enhance, to sustain community conservation. And this is the back end story. This is actually what you need to do. So visitors come in, they expect, you know, all these wonderful facilities, but remember, in some ways the local communities are actually sometimes even obliging the visitors. So in these areas where I work, they welcome visitors because they like them to come to the area. It's not necessarily that they want to derive extra incomes from them. So this is how you actually start this kind of process. And we hope that there are more community conservation projects across Nagaland. So this is the story of the Tizza Valley Conservation Network, which was started, which was set up by the local communities. This is where the village of Sky, where it all started, where my team and I, just a small group of people, along with Titli Trust, Sanjay Sondi of Titli Trust, we ventured into this area and we talked to the local communities, we documented their indigenous knowledge, and we asked them if we could help link their community conserved areas across the landscape. Now, it's not as if community conservation was not happening before we went there. They had already set up a small little area, community conserved area, but it was largely defunct. And after we started working with them in 2014, they increased the area. They protected a part of the river running through. And as I tell people who actually view this side, it says butterfly area. So the local communities noticed that all the tourists were taking pictures near these streams of butterflies. So they called it their butterfly area. And in fact, all the signage has been put up for the local people themselves. But remember, the village is all important and the village chiefs are all important. I call them men in red. So whenever you see men wearing red jackets, red coats in Nagaland, be very respectful. Well, be respectful everywhere, but they are very important. They can decide whether you work in their villages or not. But once you talk to the Gaumburas, the village elders, the chieftains, and they are convinced that what you want to do is appropriate, they are happy with it, then they will support you wholeheartedly. And the local community, the entire village actually gets on board with the process. So these are some of the important people who have made sure this community conserved effort does so well in the Tizza Valley. Now, when we actually started working there, we were working this one village, the ancestral village called Sky. And then the local people there, the village chiefs, they asked us if we wanted to extend the program across 6 villages, which were all, they all had that kinship tie. They had all evolved from this main village, Sky. So we said we would do that, but we spent a lot of time talking to all these village people, having numerous meetings. We had to talk the walk. We wanted people to come and walk in the area to see the biodiversity, but we had to convince the people before that and to explain to them what we wanted to actually achieve in the area. And out of the 6 villages, finally, actually only 3 agreed to come on board. They were worried that we might take their lands. So it's important to develop trust, and sometimes even over the long haul, it's not always possible to do that, although slowly more and more communities now want to come on board when they're seeing all the initiatives which are actually happening there today. So the first, you need entry point activities to when you work in an area, and that was documenting the traditional knowledge. The people of Sumi community of Sky were really happy when we listed out all their birds, all their butterflies, all the local names. So in our documents, you have all their local names, the practices, what each plant and animal is used for, what are the stories behind them. And the local people were so thrilled with this document that what happened was they, on their, at their own cost, they made 1,000 copies of it and distributed it amongst all the neighboring villages. So this is important. They themselves realize how they need these written documents which will remain for their children, which will remain for posterity. We also had a lot of surveys and exposure visits. And the Gaumbura in red, he's passed away just a couple of weeks ago. But he was a really old man, and despite that, he went traveling with the youngsters. We took them on an exposure visit. They went to all these community conserved areas. They went to Konama, they went to Arunachal, they went to Kaziranga. And it's only when they went to this Parke Tiger Reserve and saw the number of hornbills, they had actually never seen a hornbill in the wild, the younger community. So that's when they decided that, yes, we really must go ahead with conservation. We also tried to use a volunteer model, and I would encourage you to actually join us in this effort. So people have contributed in kind, or through their time. People have actually paid for their trips to reach the area, and they have looked at the birds and butterflies, documented them, and added to all the wealth of knowledge of the area. Now, right on top is Alo. He's actually a local youth. He's a Chakesang youth from the adjoining Fake district. And he was trained in butterfly watching, and now that's become his passion. And with us, he was also training the local communities. He speaks Nagamese, the local language, and he can really connect with the local people there. And this is an example of working in conservation. He wrote the first paper on butterflies of Nagaland. So amazing work which he has done. Below is a photograph of a very well-known bird guide in the Northeast. He's called Binanda, and he has an amazing ear for bird calls. And he was kind enough to actually come into our areas, and he discovered this very interesting bird called the Hodgson's frogmouth for us. And somehow we needed him to first see it there, because now we see it quite often, but it was a revelation when we saw it the first time with him. And through this process, a lot of people have come, they have volunteered their time, they've taught the local communities, whether it's about birds or butterflies or conservation or marketing programs, how to actually market their ventures. So this has made it because when a small group of people are working, other people coming to visit the area, it acts as an enormous boost to conservation. We've also had a lot of bird and butterfly training programs, and some of the youth, they now set up their own camera traps, they've become photographers, wildlife photographers. One person, I'll tell you about him later, has become an amazing naturalist. And we had these WhatsApp groups we set up, and they would keep posting photographs of the birds and butterflies, and maintain very, very neat registers as well, where they would document everything they saw, where they saw it, what time they saw it, etc. Now, just quickly, a few of the pictures through their lens. These are all taken by the local youth, of birds, of butterflies, more butterflies, and moths, which I had never thought they would be interested in. Moths come out at night, they're nocturnal, they're dull, they're boring, but some of them have become experts on moths. So you never know what will happen when you actually start a process like this. And there's a lot that conservation can achieve. We've seen new bats which are unidentified. We don't know what they are. A new species of a squirrel, for example, which may be a new subspecies. You need DNA work to really understand. Snakes are hated quite a bit, and they were always killed. Now we do see live snakes in the area as well, including this interesting and relatively rare mandarin trinket. And the people have actually given up their guns. So in a symbolic gesture, they laid their guns at the altar of Kivaka village, just to show that they believed in conservation. And when we actually worked in the area, we thought that they would stop hunting maybe only in the forest areas which they had set aside. But they decided to ban hunting altogether and to ban fishing altogether. And these are massive sacrifices which they have been putting into play for their next generations, and giving up all the incomes which they can derive through hunting. They have a lot of, they charge high fines for people who violate their rules, almost 25,000. And here's a list of what they're likely to fine you if you actually go and hunt in their areas. And they're very, very steep fines. We try to set up a lot of signage on what is special in the area amongst birds, butterflies, and moths. And a lot of people contributed these photographs. They actually painted some of the birds for the area. And we had great fun actually designing the logo, because what it represents is the Tisa River, which runs through their lands, and how they are actually protecting it, and how, as a mascot for conservation, you have birds and butterflies, bird watching and butterfly watching, including the Naga sapphire, which is endemic to Nagaland, and this interesting parrotbill. We were able to organize biodiversity meets where people basically, again, they paid to come here to enjoy the area and to document the biodiversity of the area. And lots of interesting species. We have now more than 200 species of butterfly which have been seen there. We have 220 species of birds. And in some of the villages which are slightly higher up, you have the Blight's tragopan as well. You have spot-breasted parrotbills, and this was a trip which we took in search of the parrotbill. Just in terms of the ecotourism experience, so these were real homestays. The local people, whenever tourists came, and they didn't come that often, they would just vacate one of their own rooms and tourists could stay there. So never expect huge luxuries. You have to be a very spirited and adventurous person to actually come and enjoy, but it's totally well worth it. So these beautiful buildings which they have, which are decorated with all their trophies of hunting and all the flowers and orchids which grow outside. It's an amazing experience. And people enjoy themselves in whatever way they like. Some of them just sit by the river, some of them bird watch. And the best part is that they also have cultural activities, which are just an added bonus. So they may be coming to watch birds and butterflies, but in the evening, they have those wonderful Naga dances. And then everybody joins together and everybody dances and sings together. And there's a lot of bonding which actually happens in this process. And a lot of the tourists I've taken, it surprised me because I have always worked in the Northeast, so I haven't realized this reluctance on the part of people. They always think that, it's a wild area, people are not always very courteous or very civil. And they're always so happy when they come here that they tell us, okay, when's the next trip happening? When can we come back? And that was really nice to me, because I didn't realize that there were so many myths about the Northeast which actually had to be broken and were not quite true. We also had lots of moments of drama where we got to save birds from spider webs. And it's wonderful because one can actually sit outside and have a meal, the traditional Naga meal, just under the skies. Although sometimes you're in such a hurry that you just have to eat on the bonnet of your car because you have to be out there really fast. And as I said, it's travel through Nagaland is currently not for the faint of heart. There are rivers of mud which you have to plow through. The first set of ecotourists we took, their cars broke down twice. They spent a night in the cars. So gear up whenever you come to Nagaland and enjoy it, because even if you're stranded, remember you're stranded in a forest. You can hear the calls, and it's not very dangerous either. Before winding up, I just like to say that the heroes of the Tisa Valley conservation effort, I've shown some of them, a few of them here. One of them is the local champion, Ivan. And he has really carried forth this entire process. He is now independently organizing a festival, a Chengu festival. He has won a few awards for the Tisa Valley conservation effort. This is the festival where he was able to rope in experts from across Nagaland and across India actually to provide training in various things, for example, pebble art. So these are paintings which have been made from pebbles, and they're complete amazing facsimiles of these photographs we had taken of these moths and various bugs. Some of the linkages, there's a lot of information on my activities in the Tisa Valley, which you can find on the web. I'd like to thank everyone who supported us in our efforts throughout this entire process. And thank you as well for organizing this talk, because I think it's important for the outside world to understand what's happening in the Northeast and what's happening. I'm just going to skip this and in Sumi Ushkimti, and thank you for listening.
That was a lovely presentation, Pia.
Thank you so much.
We have a lot of questions. We have about 9 till now. We'll take a few because, yeah. Vipin Nayal is asking, thank you, Piaji. The chopping sound of the cuckoo took me back to my childhood when I was quite fascinated with the different sounds of birds and reptiles while exploring our jungles in Uttarakhand hills. However, now whenever I get the opportunity to visit my native region, I try to hear and feel the nature and its inhabitants, but due to climate change and human encroachment, it's different now. How can one contribute in nature conservation at personal level? Your views and guidance, please.
I think you've asked a wonderful question, and I hope that my email can be shared to you later so I can put you in touch with different groups who are working on these issues. But there's a lot of citizen science which is actually now happening across the country. So even if you see some birds, just document where you saw them, try and take photographs, try and identify them. And there are lots of websites where you can actually upload whatever you've seen. So for example, there's eBirds where birds can be listed. There's separate really good butterfly and moth websites. And so you'll be contributing to a larger effort. And it may seem inconsequential, you know, a few sightings here and there. But it's amazing how much research has actually gone into it. The other way you can actually contribute is by talking to the local communities. A lot of people are now actually, like we are doing in Nagaland, in Uttarakhand, some of my friends, Titlitra, Sita, they're actually working with the local communities there. So you can actually contribute and help train them, you can join them, you can support them in various ways. So now with the internet, really the sky's the limit, and to how one can, everybody can be involved. It's no longer about scientists. It's about all of us working together to actually document our biodiversity to help in conservation.
Thank you. Pratik Srivastav is asking that thanks for the nice presentation and interesting stories. The documentary that we saw in the beginning, Banu Haralu mentioned that tourists coming there during the time of the falcon roosting may not really be good. This again arises, the question arises whether tourism, conservation, and sustainability go hand in hand.
You know, that's a very difficult question to answer, because tourism we call it ecotourism, we call it sustainable tourism, but one always has to make sure that it is sustainable. So, for example, tourists should be allowed there, but I think at some point there's going to have to be a cap on the numbers. Now, when I went there initially, I told you, except for 2018, which is when Banu was actually made this film, not many people had come there, and the local people were kind of disappointed at that point. But at the same time, there's always a cap and a limit in terms of how much tourism should be allowed in the area. Apart from that, tourism does not really replace other sources of livelihood. So as I said, only a few people may benefit, and that's not a good thing. It should be made a little more equitable. Plus, the kind of tourism is important. So if you're going there, try and stay in homestays. When the incident Banu is talking about, it came as a surprise to everybody that there was this big meet being organized, but the actual people who were involved in the conservation effort were not really aware of what was happening. So you have to take the local communities on board. And there are also all these plans for, you know, having helicopters. I don't know if there's a helicopter pad there or what, and that may cause disturbance. So yes, tourism can have a really, really negative effect. And it can also, as I said, for example, in Konamana, you have some big lodges and all coming up. That is not what is required. But I think the onus is on the tourist who goes there, because they are the ones who are pushing for these kind of unsustainable practices. That's why I ended up by showing you, okay, sometimes you have to have breakfast on the bonnet of a car. Don't expect too much. Live with the local communities. Don't be pushy. Just ask for some basic hygiene, a clean bed. That's all. Just live with the local people the way they live, because these are very fragile areas, and you have to make sure you maintain them.
Right. And Manish Gandhi is asking, does barter system exist in Nagaland in some?
Right. So barter system does exist, though it's increasingly now a cash economy. But as I said, they're very, very self-sufficient. So each village grows enough food to feed its people, enough vegetables. They actually have surplus, which they're now actually going to sell in some of the villages occasionally. And yes, things are bartered, but the cash economy has more or less permeated to a great extent.
Right. Lakshmi Yolkar is saying, thank you. Thanks a lot, madam, for this wonderful presentation, for enlightening us with this unique tourism. I have a client who studies birds and butterflies, would like to introduce this tour to her. Thank you, Lakshmi. Surely do that.
Yes, I'd be really happy to put you in touch with everybody.
Yeah. Pratik Srivastav is asking, it is very courageous of local community tribes to stop hunting, which is a part of their tradition. I mean, that picture where they've given up the guns in the altar of the church shows their commitment. It's a very touching, moving picture. And Pratik rightly says they definitely need to be appreciated and helped to earn a living. He believes that tourism can play an important role. However, equally, it's difficult to promote these areas. Also, as we also need to consider the place doesn't become crowded and lose its charm, which has happened to quite a few destinations. That's what we basically have been saying, that we have to be very, very sensitive about who we are sending there.
Absolutely. And in fact, I talked about the rivers of mud and the fact that tourists can't really approach most of these areas, and only the
Right.
intrepid go there. I mean, the journeys are back-breaking, believe me. But at the same time, the fact that you don't have good roads there has also helped protect the area. So it's the same story you have across the world in all the fragile habitats. How do you actually bring about a balance between what the and the youngsters, believe me, none of them want to do shifting cultivation today. A lot of them want to move out. They want other sources of revenue. So it's this clash of cultures which is happening, and I honestly, I don't have the answers to it. But because Nagaland, what I found amazing is that you have the village communities discussing everything. So whenever we went in there, there would be these endless meetings, and I don't understand Sumi, but they would be discussing all the nitty gritties, whatever we were talking about, and everybody, well, at least the men of the village were particularly active and vocal there. And so they can take their own decisions, and they strongly believe, despite what the laws are, that they will. So for example, in Kunama, for a while hunting was opened for a week, because what also happens is you protect a forest, and then suddenly you have all these human wildlife conflicts. You have wild boars which are destroying your crops, and these issues start happening, and then the support for closing hunting dwindles away. So what I like is that they actually are very proactive. They actually look very carefully at these issues and then try and decide what is required. So of course, I mean, all of us, we all need, we desire wealth and a comfortable lifestyle. But I hope that the village communities themselves regulate, because they can put a stop whenever they want. So again, in Konama, they've opened up 30 permits, I believe, in 2019, which allow some hunting of all these pest species by a farmer in his own land. So that's the way you're going to have to manage all these different issues. The other thing I would like to say is, people in Nagaland are not really poor. They need that money for the cash economy, but otherwise they are extremely self-sufficient. There are a lot of funds which actually go to the villages for various development efforts. So never think that, they are well off, very comfortable people, and they have a lot of livestock, which also replaces the wildlife which they hunt. They have pigs, they eat dogs, they eat cats, they have chickens. You go to a village, it's full of livestock. They have Mithun. How can I forget that? So it's actually a very, very sustainable lifestyle which they have even today.
And also conservation is a ever evolving process, so I think which the Nagas are doing it brilliantly. Uh, Aman Sherawat is asking, are accommodation privately owned, the homestays, or is it a community effort?
So they have, none of them are so formalized. So that was one issue we were facing. Each homestay you went and stayed in somebody's home. It was privately owned over there. But then we also requested some agencies to come on board and give training like Airbnb and provide some publicity, in which case it becomes we prefer it if it's given on a rotational basis amongst the community, but very often for other outside partners and tour operators, they prefer individuals. So we need to work through some of these issues to ensure that it becomes equitable. So it's variable. In our area it was completely privately owned, but nothing is, as I said, nothing is done without the knowledge of the village council and of the entire village. The villages are relatively small, so even if you're staying in that particular house, there'll be a lot of discussion which is happening by the community there.
Right. Sunil Jain and Manish Yadav says, thank you for the wonderful session.
Thank you so much.
Right. Uh, Chandrasekhar is asking, hi Pia, as you said, 80% of Nagaland is under forest. So in this case, how is the infrastructure there, and what kind of challenges the locals are facing? I mean, we talked about infrastructure, but what are the kind of challenges that the locals are facing there? Because we saw in Arunachal, no, it was not even Arunachal, yes, where where they walked with a lady for 5 days to reach the hospital. So, what are the kind of challenges that the locals are facing there from your own experience on the ground?
You know, it was really interesting. When I first went there, I knew nothing about Nagaland. Yes, the villages were very remote, but I thought we could have some kind of educational programs for the youth, the kids in the village. And then when I actually ended up in the villages, I found there were no youngsters there, for example. There was hardly anybody. There were only older kids or older people in their 20s. Why? Because there are no educational facilities. So the young people have to move out. They move to the district headquarters, they move to Kohima, to Dimapur, and way beyond. And then after, many of them don't want to come back. So and as far as the income goes, it's sustainable agriculture. It's a few government positions which may be there. Otherwise, there's no other source of actual income in terms of an occupation, because they're such far-flung areas. What even the produce, and they have wonderful produce, a variety of different things which are grown there. But where do you actually market them? How do you actually process them to ensure that they reach far-flung areas? So it's nothing but challenges in terms of living a comfortable lifestyle, and zooming is extremely hard, very, very hard today. And because of the large the increase in population sizes, some people don't even want to zoom any longer. In fact, some of our community conserved areas are just abandoned zooms because they're far away from the village. It's very difficult to actually reach the areas. People now want to do other, so everything is in terms, everything really is a challenge, apart from the fact that they are self-sufficient for their own needs. But anything outside that, and in terms of hospitals, there are no hospitals there. You have to, as Kuntil mentioned, you have to travel really far for that. So for example, they had started a helicopter service, and I was telling Kuntil about it yesterday, which sometimes came to the Zunibotho district headquarters. But you could never actually get on those because there were always sick people who had priority, who need to be flown to hospital somewhere else. So it's a very, very difficult lifestyle. And I used to see people going late at night all the way to the hospital. They would have to hire, they would always hire some private vehicle. And can you imagine a sick person going on those roads? It used to be hellish for me. I have a bit of a back problem. I can't imagine what it must be like for sick people. So life is beautiful, and people like me love it. But it's beautiful for people like me. It's hard actually for the local people there.
Yeah,
And
it's a hard life. It's a very, very difficult
we
life.
need
Yeah,
to recognize. I mean, that's why the young people, they don't want to stay there any longer. They want to move to the comfort of a city.
right. Rashmi Gupta is asking, Apart from agriculture, what else do the Naga tribes do for a living?
So agriculture is very important and livestock rearing. So they rear mithun, they rear pigs. Those are some of the most important. They also produce their own textiles, but again, that's largely for their self-consumption.
Yeah.
In terms of actual handicrafts, that's in pockets. It's not really very widespread at all because most of it is for their own villages and their own consumption. Yeah.
And also government jobs and
Yeah, government jobs, of course, are very coveted. Whoever
yeah,
can get those posts, they really look out for it. But of course, they're limited now.
yeah,
Who can? So we had a lot of the youth who would just be looking around for government jobs. They were not getting government jobs. Many of them would act as something called substitute teachers, where they would substitute for a teacher who was doing something else. That seemed to be quite a lucrative option. A lot were doing that. But honestly, very, very restricted options. Yeah.
right. Um, it was wonderful having you, Pia, on this session today, where you enlightened a lot of us about Nagaland. Uh, I mean, I sitting like a couple of hours away from Nagaland, maybe 3 hours away from Nagaland. From the border is probably 2.5 hours away. I didn't know so much, I didn't know. I learned so much today, and I'm sure our audience did too. Thank you so much. It was lovely having you. You have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we hopefully will have another session with you soon on maybe on some
Thank you,
other
Kapil. I
topic.
really
Maybe
enjoyed this.
maybe on Arunachal, given your experience
Oh,
there.
I love to do that. I love the Northeast and I love talking about it. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
People, thank you so much for joining in today. Please fill in the poll before leaving. Give us your feedback. It helps us to get better. Thank you so much for logging in today. And tomorrow we have another interesting webinar where we'll be talking about uh, some hidden gems from Northwest Tamil Nadu, Pollachi and Annamalai. Don't forget to log in. Thank you all for logging in today. Stay safe, stay healthy. Bye bye, everyone.